Breaking news from Africa. A shock in Burkina Faso has stunned the world. Not a coup, not a bomb, but something even more dangerous to the powerful. On September 12, 2025, Captain Ibrahim Traoré delivered a message no one expected. He didn't send soldiers. He didn't ask for loans. He rolled out 764 machines. Bulldozers, road graders, concrete mixers, dump trucks, all lined up in the Sahel sun. Not weapons of war, but weapons of independence. Machines worth more than $150 million, paid for with Burkina Faso's own gold. Traoré, only 37 years old, stood tall in his beret. His voice carried across Ouagadougou. No IMF loans. No Western aid. No begging at the feet of colonizers. These are ours. The crowd erupted. Men lifted their children. Women raised their fists. Farmers shouted. Students cried. Soldiers saluted. One chant shook the capital. Africa will rise. For decades, Burkina Faso was trapped in poverty. $600 million of foreign debt weighed it down. Each year, tens of millions vanished into interest payments. Meanwhile, its gold, over 8 tons annually, flowed out to Europe. France today holds the 4th largest gold reserve in the world, yet not 1 ounce comes from French soil. Much of it came from Africa. On this day, Traoré said, "Enough." He handed over the first fleet of machines, and he promised more, 3 additional waves, building 3,000 to 5,000 kilometers of roads each year. For the first time, villages long forgotten would connect to markets, clinics, and schools. A farmer in Dori could sell crops in Bobo Dioulasso. A mother in Kaya could reach a hospital before it was too late. A young man in Fada Ngorma could find steady work as an operator, not a migrant. This is not just about roads, Traoré said. This is about freedom. The world took notice. In Washington and Paris, leaders frowned. In Moscow and Bamako, allies smiled. Because this was not only a project. This was a declaration of war, against dependency, against humiliation, against the old order. And the question now echoes far beyond Burkina Faso. Can one poor nation, led by one young captain, defy the powers that ruled Africa for centuries? September 12, 2025. The sun burned over Ouagadougou, but the heat didn't matter. Thousands gathered around the city's main square, waiting for something they had never seen before. They didn't come for speeches. They came for proof. And proof rolled in on heavy wheels. One after another, machines thundered into the square. Bulldozers, graders, concrete mixers, dump trucks. 764 machines in total, valued at more than $150 million. Enough to build not just roads, but a new path for the nation. Reporters counted. 124 4x4 pickup trucks, tough enough for the roughest Sahel terrain. 80 concrete mixers, ready to pour foundations for schools, clinics, and bridges. Crane trucks, their steel arms lifting not only beams, but the hopes of a country. Dozens of dump trucks and city haulers carrying stone and gravel from Burkina's own quarries. Recycling machines, turning waste into building material. Making progress sustainable. Mobile projectors, lighting construction sites long after the sun went down. Each piece had a story. Each one was more than steel. To the crowd, they were symbols. Weapons not for war, but for independence. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped forward. At 37, he was younger than many in the crowd, but the people called him Le Père, the father. He raised his hand, and silence fell. "Brothers and sisters," he began, "for too long our leaders sold our gold, our land, our dignity for crumbs. Today we say never again. These machines are ours, paid with our gold. They will build our roads, not Paris. They will build our schools, not Washington. They will build our freedom. The crowd erupted, drums pounded, women ululated, children waved flags stitched from scraps of fabric. It wasn't just a celebration, it was defiance. For decades, Burkina Faso had been chained by foreign debt, $600 million by 2022. Every year, millions vanished into interest payments to banks in Paris and Washington. Yet here stood proof that Africa could pay for its own progress. Traore had redirected revenues from nationalized gold mines, once sold off for pennies to foreign companies, into machinery that every village could touch. The numbers stunned experts. If each region used its fleet, the machines could carve 3,000 to 5,000 kilometers of new roads every year. In a decade, the country could double its entire road network. For a farmer in Dori, that meant reaching the market in Bobo Dioulasso without losing half his harvest on broken roads. For a mother in Kaya, it meant reaching a hospital before her child's fever turned fatal. For a young man in Fata Ngorma, it meant a job, not as a migrant abroad, but as a builder at home. Yet not everyone cheered. Western diplomats whispered in hotel lobbies. "Where did the money come from?" one asked. "What does Moscow have to do with this?" another demanded. On social media, Western pundits called it reckless, dangerous, unsustainable. But for the people in Ouagadougou, none of that mattered. They saw the machines. They heard the engines. They believed. Traore's speech grew sharper. This is not just a handover. This is a declaration of war, not with guns, but with dignity. A war against dependency. A war against the debt traps that have held us captive for generations. The crowd roared louder than the engines. For the first time in decades, ordinary Burkinabe felt that history was moving in their favor. But in the shadows, others were watching. Generals in Paris, analysts in Washington, boardrooms in London. To them, these machines weren't just steel. They were a threat to the order that had fed their nations for centuries. And as Traore raised his fist, a chilling question spread across Africa. If he can build without them, how far will they go to stop him? The roar of the engines faded, but the roar of the people grew louder. In Ouagadougou's streets, the celebration didn't end when the machines rolled out. Crowds poured into every district. They carried drums, whistles, banners painted in red, green, and gold. Women balanced baskets of food to share with strangers. Soldiers stood guard, not to control the crowd, but to march alongside them. For the people, this was more than a delivery. It was a victory. After decades of humiliation, here was proof that Africa could fund its own progress. No loans, no aid, no strings, just dignity. In the north, where insurgents once cut off entire villages, people gathered around radios to hear the news. 3,000 to 5,000 kilometers of new roads every year, the announcer repeated. For farmers, that meant reaching markets in hours instead of days. For children, it meant riding a bus to school instead of walking barefoot through dust. For families, it meant ambulances could reach them in time. Each kilometer wasn't just pavement, it was survival. As the news spread beyond Burkina Faso, reactions were explosive. In Bamako, the capital of Mali, leaders of the Alliance of Sahel States, the AES, called an emergency meeting. Within hours, Mali and Niger declared their support. A joint statement read, "An attack on Burkina Faso is an attack on us all." Crowds in Niamey filled the streets, chanting Traore's name, waving homemade posters. Africa is not for sale. But not everyone was celebrating. In Washington, the State Department issued a cautious note. "We urge Burkina Faso to maintain fiscal responsibility and respect international commitments." On French television, commentators went further. One former official warned, "This is reckless. This is Moscow's hand at work. If left unchecked, the Sahel will slip away. Behind closed doors, Western diplomats fumed. They had seen the numbers. Burkina Faso was diverting gold revenues once tied to French companies into national projects. In 2024 alone, mines under state control generated over $80 million in revenue. By 2025, that figure was expected to rise to $120 million, enough to fund entire infrastructure projects without a single foreign loan. The anger wasn't just about economics, it was about influence. For decades, France's troops patrolled the Sahel, and American aid agencies controlled the budgets. Now Traore had cut the cords. He had told them plainly, partnership must be win-win. No more win-lose. On social media, the reaction was electric. TikTok and X exploded with clips of Traore's speech, his beret, his fist raised in the air. Youth across Africa called him Africa's Che Guevara. Hashtags trended. Hashtag Burkina Builds. Hashtag Africa Not For Sale. Hashtag Roads of Freedom. In Ghana, Kenya, and Nigeria, students marched in solidarity. If Burkina can do it, one placard read, so can we. Yet in Ouagadougou, the mood was more than celebration. It was defiance. People understood the danger. Traore had already survived more than 20 assassination attempts since 2022, most foiled by loyal guards. The fear was real, but so was the determination. A young woman in the crowd told a reporter, "They killed Sankara, they killed Lumumba, they killed Gaddafi, but we will not let them kill Traore." The symbolism was clear. To ordinary Africans, Traore wasn't just a leader. He was the reincarnation of every revolutionary silenced before. He was the living message that Africa could not be broken. That night, the machines were moved to secure bases before being deployed across the regions. Security forces worked double shifts. Volunteers patrolled roads. It felt less like a construction project and more like a mobilization for war. And maybe it was. Because while the people danced in the streets, in Paris and Washington, strategies were already being drawn. Economic sanctions, covert operations, political sabotage. Tools used many times before were now back on the table. As the lights dimmed in Ouagadougou, one chilling thought remained. How long before celebration turns into confrontation? In the weeks that followed the historic handover, life in Burkina Faso began to shift. Not in grand speeches, but in the quiet routines of ordinary people. The sound of engines became the rhythm of a new era. In the countryside near Kaya, farmers watched as graders cut through dry earth. For years it took them 2 days by cart to reach the nearest market. Now, with roads taking shape, the trip would be cut to hours. One farmer said with pride, "For the first time my millet may reach town before it rots." In Dori, mothers lined up at a small clinic. An ambulance driver told a journalist, "On old roads, a fevered child often died before we arrived. With these new routes, we may save half of them." The numbers were stark. Burkina Faso had one of the highest child mortality rates in the region. Each paved road meant another life saved. Jobs followed quickly. For every machine deployed, at least 10 to 15 operators, mechanics, and support staff were hired. Across all regions, more than 7,000 new jobs appeared almost overnight. They were not foreign jobs, they were Burkinabe jobs. Young men, once forced to migrate for work, now had steady wages at home. Families, once torn apart by desperation, could begin to heal. Politically, the impact was just as dramatic. The National Assembly met in secret and, with little debate, passed a motion to nationalize all major gold and mineral operations. For years, these mines had been leased to foreign companies for pennies on the dollar. One infamous deal had sold the Wona mine for just $80 million, even though its estimated value was $300 million. Under Traore, those days were over. Revenues soared, $120 million in 2025 alone, and every cent was redirected into roads, schools, and health clinics. Not everyone approved. In Ouagadougou's wealthier neighborhoods, elites whispered nervously. Some had grown rich as brokers for foreign contracts. Now their influence was crumbling. A local businessman admitted anonymously, "Before we were middlemen. Now the government deals directly. We are cut out." Abroad, sanctions struck. Western banks quietly froze Burkina Faso's credit lines. Aid programs were suspended. International NGOs complained they could no longer operate freely. The United Nations issued a cautious warning about sustainability and human rights. But inside Burkina Faso, the people shrugged. "We survived on nothing before," one woman said. "We can survive without their crumbs." Still, the risks were real. Fuel prices rose, imports slowed. In some villages, spare parts for the machines were already scarce. Insurgents in the north sensed opportunity, launching raids to disrupt road projects. In one attack, a grader was destroyed and 2 young operators were killed. Their funeral drew thousands. Instead of fear, the mood was resolved. The families draped the coffins in the national flag and declared, "They died building freedom." Meanwhile, the alliance deepened. Mali and Niger sent technicians and engineers to assist. Guinea pledged food shipments to stabilize markets. Russia delivered drones and electronic defenses to protect road convoys. China offered to supply spare parts at reduced cost. For the first time, Burkina Faso was not isolated. It was part of a new network, one that bypassed Paris and Washington. Inside Ouagadougou, Traore remained calm but firm. "This path will not be easy," he told Parliament. "There will be sacrifice. But every road we build is a wall against slavery. Every kilometer is a step toward freedom." The people believed him. Yet the tension was clear. How long could a small, poor nation resist sanctions, insurgents, and international pressure? How long before the weight became too much? And in foreign capitals, another question was asked in hushed tones. Would the West allow this experiment to succeed, or would they crush it before it spread? While the streets of Ouagadougou echoed with songs of victory, far away in Washington the mood was uneasy. Analysts at the Pentagon studied satellite images of the 764 machines. To them, the fleet was not only about roads, it was about independence. And independence in Africa often meant less control for the West. A classified briefing leaked days later revealed the concern. Burkina Faso is redirecting gold revenues away from Western banks and into state-led projects, the report said. This undermines our influence and strengthens Russia's position in the Sahel. In Paris, the reaction was sharper. Former French officials warned openly on television, if Traore succeeds, France loses not only Burkina Faso, but the entire region. For a nation whose 4th largest gold reserves depend heavily on African supply, the threat was existential. Without Africa, even France's former president once admitted, France would sink into the ranks of third-world countries. Moscow saw it differently. Russian media hailed Traore as a new Sankara, praising his defiance of Western debt traps. Within weeks, Russia delivered a batch of surveillance drones and anti-air systems, officially for counter-terrorism, but everyone understood the real message. Burkina Faso was no longer alone. China, cautious but pragmatic, offered to sell spare parts for the machines at reduced cost. Partnership without interference, one Chinese diplomat said, a subtle jab at the West. Even Turkey and Iran expressed interest in joining new trade routes through the Sahel. In the United States, debate split across party lines. Some officials argued for sanctions, warning, if Burkina Faso breaks free, others will follow. Others cautioned against overreaction, fearing that harsh measures would push the entire Sahel firmly into Russia's orbit. On talk shows, commentators mocked the situation. We're losing influence not to armies, but to bulldozers. The world was watching. Could a small landlocked country, once dismissed as one of the poorest on earth, set off a chain reaction? Could one captain with machines instead of missiles redraw Africa's future? In Washington, one question echoed through the halls of power. Is this the beginning of a regional revolution, or the spark of a global crisis? The dust is barely settled in Burkina Faso, yet the meaning of September 12, 2025 is already clear. This was more than a ceremony. It was a turning point. With 764 machines, Captain Ibrahim Traoré declared that Africa will no longer wait for permission to build its own future. But history warns us, revolutions attract enemies. Thomas Sankara was silenced in 1987, Patrice Lumumba in 1961, Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. Each man dreamed of a free Africa. Each was struck down before his dream was fulfilled. Today, Traore walks the same path under the same shadow. Sanctions are tightening. Propaganda is spreading. Insurgents are stirring in the north. Western powers are quietly asking, how long will this last? But ordinary Africans are answering, as long as we have breath, it will not die. The risks are real. Fuel shortages, rising prices, attacks on convoys, even whispers of assassination plots. Yet the roads are being built. Farmers are reaching markets. Mothers are reaching hospitals. Children are reaching schools. And that is why the people stand firm. Because this is not only about politics, it is about life itself. For the United States and the world, the question is urgent. Will we see Traoré as a threat, or as a chance for Africa to rise with dignity? Will we allow bulldozers to pave peace, or will we choose conflict to protect old empires? In the Sahel, the night sky glows with work lights as machines continue long after sunset. Men and women labor together, driven by a simple faith that tomorrow will be better if they build it with their own hands. And now, dear listener, I leave you with a question. Is Ibrahim Traoré the hope of Africa, or the spark of a storm? Think of your own hometown. Think of the road that once connected your family to safety, to opportunity, to life. Imagine if someone tried to take that away. Would you fight to keep it? If this story touched you, share it. Speak of it. Pray for those who build in the night so children may travel by day. Because what happens in Burkina Faso will not stay in Burkina Faso. It may decide the future of an entire continent.